It all began with a man who didn't fit the usual profile of a killer. He wasn't poor, desperate, or pushed into crime by circumstances. He wasn't a career criminal. In fact, to those around him, he was polite, intelligent, and oddly charming. But beneath that calm exterior, a storm brewed, a darkness that didn't come from rage, jealousy, or even greed. It came from something far more chilling: curiosity. He wanted to know what it felt like to take a life. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't about revenge or even self-defense. He described it later with a terrifying coldness. He simply wanted the experience. To him, life and death were concepts to toy with, human beings reduced to test subjects for his twisted imagination. When investigators finally sat across from him, they expected denial, excuses, maybe even crocodile tears. Instead, they were met with an unsettling grin. His confession wasn't apologetic. It was almost gleeful. "I just wanted to know what it would feel like," he said, his eyes sparkling with a psychopathic calm that chilled everyone in that room. And this, dear viewers, is where our story begins, not with a motive you can rationalize, but with a motive you cannot even begin to understand. White right pointing backhand index. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you, what do you think drives a person to kill out of sheer curiosity, an absence of empathy, or a deliberate rejection of morality? Comment your thoughts below as we unravel this chilling case. Next, we reveal his background and how the first signs of danger appeared. To understand how someone reaches this point, we must go back to his childhood. Born into a seemingly normal suburban family, there was no record of abuse, neglect, or poverty, factors often linked to criminal behavior. On the outside, he was like any other boy. But on the inside, something was different. Teachers noticed he was distant, detached. While other children laughed, cried, or showed excitement, his reactions were muted. He didn't form deep friendships. He preferred isolation. When asked about feelings, he seemed confused, almost studying emotions like an alien learning about human beings for the first time. The first red flag came with animals. Neighborhood pets began disappearing. Stray cats were found mutilated. Neighbors whispered, but no one had proof. His parents dismissed concerns as boys being boys. But it was more than mischief. It was early psychopathy in the making. Studies show that harming animals is one of the strongest indicators of future violent behavior. And in his mind, these acts weren't cruelty. They were experiments. He wanted to see what death looked like, how it happened, and, most disturbingly, what he felt while doing it. That feeling, or rather the lack of it, haunted him. "I felt nothing," he later admitted, "and I wanted more." Next, we'll explore how this chilling curiosity escalated as he grew older. As a teenager, his experiments grew bolder. He began keeping a private journal. In it, he documented his thoughts with disturbing precision: sketches of bones, notes about anatomy, questions about the moment of life leaving the body. Most people turn to sports, music, or hobbies in their teenage years. He turned to morbid fantasies. His internet search history, uncovered years later, revealed late-night deep dives into crime forums, autopsy images, and serial killer documentaries. Yet, he wasn't reckless. He knew how to blend in. At school, he was quiet but well-behaved. No one suspected that behind his calm face was a boy rehearsing murder in his mind. By 17, he no longer found satisfaction in animals. The urge to try it on a person consumed him. He began hanging around vulnerable areas, homeless shelters, dark alleys, bus stops at night. Watching, waiting, wondering if tonight would be the night he finally crossed the line. He told himself it would just be once. Just to know. Just for the experience. Next, the chilling night when curiosity finally became crime. It was a cold night when he acted. His victim, a drifter in his 40s, alone, intoxicated, and vulnerable. The perfect target. He later confessed that he didn't feel nervous, only curious. He approached his victim with kindness, offering a cigarette, engaging in casual conversation. The drifter laughed, unsuspecting. Then, in one swift motion, curiosity turned to cruelty. The act itself was horrifying, but what shocked investigators most was his reflection afterward. He didn't panic. He didn't flee. Instead, he crouched beside the lifeless body, staring, studying, taking in every detail like a scientist recording data. Later, in his confession, he said, "I thought I'd feel something. Fear, guilt, excitement. But I felt nothing. Just silence. That's when I realized I'd have to try again." And with those words, a serial predator was born. The first kill wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Curiosity had opened a door he could never close. Unlike killers who try to cover their tracks, he was meticulous but not paranoid. He treated murder like a ritual. Each victim carefully chosen, always someone society might overlook. The homeless, the isolated, the forgotten. After each act, he felt a void. He admitted, "It's like scratching an itch that never goes away." He wasn't motivated by anger, lust, or revenge. He was motivated by the absence of feeling, the desperate search for something that might finally make him feel alive. This is what made him especially dangerous. There was no pattern detectives could easily trace. No personal grudges. No relationship ties. Just random, cold-blooded selections. And every time, he confessed, he left the scene calm, almost serene. To the world, he remained the polite neighbor, the helpful co-worker. To himself, he was perfecting an experiment. Over time, families began reporting missing loved ones. A homeless man here, a runaway there. At first, police dismissed them as accidents, voluntary disappearances, or drug-related vanishings. But behind the statistics lay a silent predator. Witnesses occasionally recalled seeing a man who looked normal near the last known location of some victims. But normal wasn't enough to raise suspicion. He didn't have the appearance of a monster. That was his camouflage. Still, a detective named Harris began connecting dots. He noticed the disappearances clustered around certain areas. Late-night witnesses described the same chilling detail. A man who seemed too calm, too friendly, almost rehearsed in his interactions. The killer, of course, was thrilled by this cat-and-mouse game. He clipped newspaper articles about the missing. He watched press conferences, grinning as families begged for answers. In his mind, he wasn't just killing for the experience anymore. He was killing to outsmart the world. When investigators eventually raided his home, what they found was chilling, a journal. Not filled with guilt, not with apologies, but with cold, clinical notes. He described each victim like a case study, their age, behavior, final words, how long it took. He didn't write with emotion. He wrote like a scientist cataloging results. One entry read, "Subject number 3, no struggle. Quick, unsatisfying. Need to test with more resistance next time." Another, "Subject number 5, looked at me as if pleading. I felt curious, not guilty, still curious." The handwriting was neat, almost elegant, which made the content even more disturbing. It wasn't a killer venting. It was a psychopath keeping score. The journal became the key to understanding not only his crimes but also his psyche. He wasn't driven by rage or compulsion. He was driven by experimentation. And every entry ended the same way. Still nothing. When detectives finally confronted him, they expected denial, excuses, or bargaining. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Finally," he said, "you caught me." He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't try to defend himself. Instead, he began talking, calmly, casually, almost cheerfully. He confessed to multiple murders, each detail lining up with the journal entries. His explanation, "I wanted to know what it felt like. That's all. Just the experience." Detectives described the room as colder than any interrogation they'd ever done. His lack of remorse, his almost playful tone, it was as if he were talking about a science project, not human lives. The most disturbing part, he admitted he would have continued forever if he hadn't been caught. "There are always more people," he said with a shrug. When his case went public, people were horrified. How do you process a man who kills not for money, not for revenge, but for curiosity? The courtroom was packed. Families of victims wept as prosecutors read his journal entries aloud. Jurors sat pale-faced, some turning away from the chilling words. The defense tried to argue insanity, but psychiatrists testified that while he lacked empathy, he fully understood right from wrong. He wasn't insane. He was simply evil. When asked if he regretted his crimes, he smirked. "Regret? No, I regret getting caught." His words sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Mothers clutched their children. Jurors later admitted they had nightmares. And the world finally saw him for what he truly was, a predator in human skin. Daniel revealed in his confession that he often heard what he described as whispers. Not literal hallucinations, but intrusive thoughts that pushed him closer toward violence. He told investigators that whenever he saw someone alone, those whispers grew louder, urging him to find out what it felt like. For many, this was a chilling detail. Was Daniel truly driven by psychopathy alone? Or did he also suffer from a form of untreated mental illness? His lawyers attempted to blur that line, but prosecutors reminded the court, Daniel never once tried to seek help. Instead, he nurtured those thoughts like secrets he was proud of. In this part of the case, we're faced with a disturbing question. How many people walk among us carrying silent obsessions that no one else sees? As detectives pieced together Daniel's movements, they noticed a disturbing pattern. Each of his victims shared something in common. They were all chosen at random, yet they were in moments of vulnerability. One was walking home late, another was jogging with headphones, another was simply waiting for a bus. Daniel confessed that this was intentional. He wanted to test how easy it would be to take control of a stranger's life in an ordinary setting. To him, the unpredictability was part of the thrill. This turned Daniel's case into something far more terrifying, because he didn't target specific people. He targeted opportunity. That meant, in his eyes, it could have been anyone. Courtroom observers described Daniel as unnervingly calm throughout his trial. He showed little emotion when gruesome details were read aloud. At times, he even seemed bored, as though the process of justice was just another inconvenience in his life. But one moment stood out. When a victim's mother stood to deliver her testimony, her voice shaking as she described the pain of burying her child, Daniel smirked. That single expression became a defining image of the trial, proof, many believed, that he lacked even the most basic empathy. The prosecution used this as ammunition, arguing that Daniel was not only dangerous but irredeemable. Midway through the trial, Daniel wrote a letter to a journalist. In it, he described his killings in graphic detail and signed off with the chilling line, "I didn't do it for hate. I did it for the experience." The letter was entered into evidence, and it shook the jury. While his defense tried to argue for insanity, this letter proved that Daniel fully understood his actions. He wasn't confused, he wasn't delusional, he was deliberate. For the families of the victims, this letter was the ultimate cruelty. Not only had he stolen their loved ones, but he had also reduced their deaths to something he considered an experiment. As Daniel's crimes were laid bare in court, the community was forced to confront its darkest fears. People began asking themselves, how could this happen here? The victims weren't involved in risky behavior. They weren't connected to Daniel in any way. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives, caught in the path of someone who wanted to experience killing. This reality made the case especially haunting. It shattered the illusion of safety that many had taken for granted. Suddenly, everyone looked at strangers differently. Could the man across the street be hiding the same urges as Daniel? When it came time for the jury to deliberate, they faced one of the most difficult choices imaginable. Daniel's defense argued that he should be spared the death penalty because he suffered from mental illness. The prosecution insisted that Daniel was fully aware of his choices, that he planned each step, and that he relished the pain he caused. Behind closed doors, jurors debated fiercely. Some admitted they had trouble sleeping, haunted by the thought of letting Daniel live. Others wrestled with the moral implications of ending a life, even his. The weight of justice pressed heavily on every person in that jury box. When the jury returned, the courtroom fell silent. The judge read the verdict aloud. Daniel Carter was guilty on all counts of murder. The jury recommended the maximum sentence, life without the possibility of parole. As the words rang out, some families cried, others sat stone-faced, and Daniel himself didn't flinch. He didn't shout, didn't plead, didn't even look remorseful. To him, the verdict seemed meaningless. For the families, however, it was closure. Not healing, because nothing could truly heal what had been done, but at least a measure of justice. Even after Daniel was sentenced, the effects of his crimes lingered. Survivors of his attacks struggled with trauma. Families of victims tried to piece their lives back together. Entire neighborhoods carried the invisible scars of fear. Counselors and victim advocates worked tirelessly to help the community recover. But the truth remained. Evil had walked among them in the form of an ordinary man who decided to kill for the experience. And that question haunted everyone. How many others like him are still out there, hiding in plain sight? Experts later studied Daniel's case to better understand psychopathic behavior. They highlighted key warning signs: lack of empathy, obsession with control, manipulative charm, and a disturbing fascination with violence. But one of the hardest lessons was this: not every warning sign is obvious. Daniel lived what appeared to be a normal life. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no one suspected the darkness within him. This makes cases like his especially chilling, because they prove that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who look perfectly ordinary. Daniel Carter's story forces us to confront the unsettling reality of human nature. He killed not out of necessity, not out of rage, not even for profit, but simply for curiosity, for the experience. It's a case that leaves us with heavy questions. How do we protect ourselves from threats we can't see? How do we identify those who hide evil behind a mask of normalcy? And what does it mean when someone chooses to destroy life not for survival, but for satisfaction? To this day, Daniel remains behind bars. He will never again walk free. But the horror he left behind lives on, in the memories of families, in the scars of survivors, and in the chilling reminder that sometimes, the scariest monsters are not born from rage, but from curiosity.